Hello, I'm Dennis Taylor, and welcome to the Opera Den. Today I'm going to discuss 4 operas that had disastrous premieres, but are now among the most popular and best-known operas we have. It would be easy to summarize each failure in a sentence or two, but I will go into some detail about the difficulties these operas encountered, and then we'll hear some excerpts from each of them. Rossini's opera, The Barber of Seville, had its premiere in Rome on February 20th, 1816, and it was a disaster. There were several factors that led to its hostile reception, but the primary reason is that there was already a popular version of that opera by a highly respected living composer. So why would a young Rossini, eager to enhance his reputation as an innovative opera composer, choose to write an opera based on the same play by Beaumarchais? The short answer is that he had no choice because he was contractually obligated to do so. Some historical context is in order. Italian composer Giovanni Paisiello was one of the most popular and prolific opera composers of the late 1700s. His opera, The Barber of Seville, or The Useless Precaution, was first staged in St. Petersburg, Russia in 1782. Gioacchino Rossini was born in Pesaro, Italy in 1792 and wrote his first opera at 18. In December 1815, Rossini signed a contract to write a new opera for the Teatro di Torre Argentina in Rome. The contract stipulated the following terms. Rossini had to deliver an opera in a month, supervise its preparation and rehearsals, adapt the score to the singer's demands, conduct the first 3 performances, and he had to write the opera based on whatever libretto was provided to him. The impresario didn't like the first libretto he got, so he turned to a different man who produced a libretto based on the Beaumarchais play, The Barber of Seville. They decided to alter the title slightly, now calling it Almaviva, or The Useless Precaution. Here's a copy of the poster. Rossini wrote a letter to the older composer saying that he did not intend to compete with him and that his new work would focus on different portions of the Beaumarchais text. But Paisiello supporters showed up on opening night, spoiling for a fight, and the fireworks began immediately. As Rossini took his place at the conductor's keyboard, laughter erupted over his suit, which was too tight for him. The guitar, which Almaviva used to accompany himself in the opening scene, had not been tuned during rehearsals. In the process of trying to tune the guitar, a string broke, which prompted laughter and whistling. Don Basilio tripped as he made his stage entrance and ended up with a bloody nose, much to the amusement of the hostile audience. Oh, and there was a cat that walked on stage during the final ensemble of the first act and refused to leave. The singer who played Rosina wrote this account about the end of the first act. Quote, "Booed on all sides, we came to the finale. Laughter, cat calls, and piercing whistling. And silence was established only to be broken by even louder demonstrations." Unquote. The audience was so boisterous that the singers simply could not be heard through most of the evening. At the conclusion of the performance, the audience chanted, "Paisiello! Paisiello!" Rossini quickly made his way out of the theater and stayed home on the second night, although an attentive audience was delighted at what they heard in this new opera. But the damage done by the opening night fiasco lingered. Initially, critics compared Rossini's version unfavorably to that of Paisiello, and it took a few years for sentiment to swing in Rossini's favor. Let's hear 2 excerpts from this sparkling comedy, which, by the way, Rossini composed in a mere 13 days. I have chosen the 2014 Royal Opera House production for its all-star cast. The title character, Figaro, a man brimming with self-confidence, makes his entrance and announces how indispensable he is. Here's the familiar aria, Largo al Factotum, sung by Italian baritone Pietro Spagnoli.
Largo factotum della città, largo, la 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 la, resta bottega che la già presto, la 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 la. Ah, che bel vivere, che bel piacere, che bel piacere, per un barbiere di qualità, di qualità. Bravo, Figaro, bravo, bravissimo, bravo. La 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 la. Oh, l'ultimissimo per verità, bravo. La 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 la. Fortunatissimo per verità, fortunatissimo per verità, la 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 la. Pronto a far tutto la notte e il giorno, sempre d'intorno, il giro sta, mille cuccagna per un barbiere, vita più nobile non si dà. La 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 la. Rasori e pettini, lacci e forbici, al mio comando tutto qui sta. Lacci e forbici, rasori e pettini, al mio comando tutto qui sta. Bella risorsa, poi del mestiere, con la donnetta, col cavaliere, con la donnetta, la 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 la, col cavaliere, la 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 la, la che bel vivere, che bel piacere, che bel piacere, per un barbiere di qualità, di qualità. Tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, come ragazzi, vecchie fanciulle, alla parrucca, presso la barba, alla Sardegna, presso il biglietto, tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, alla parrucca, presso la barba, presso il biglietto, e Figaro, 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 ahimè, che furia, che falla, uno alla volta, per carità, per carità, per carità, uno alla volta, uno alla volta, uno alla volta, per carità. Figaro, son qua, ehi, Figaro, qua, Figaro qua, Figaro là, Figaro qua, Figaro là, Figaro su, Figaro giù, Figaro su, Figaro giù, poco pochissimo sotto le fine, sotto il capodo della città, della città, della città, della città, della città. Bravo Figaro, bravo, bravissimo, bravo Figaro, bravo, bravissimo, fortunatissimo, 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 per verità, fortunatissimo, 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 per verità, sono il fantatum della città, sono il fantatum della città, della città, della città.
Rosina is a volatile teenager and has just been serenaded by Almaviva, who identified himself as Lindoro. She acknowledges that she's in love with him, saying, quote, "My heart is already pierced, and it was Lindoro who threw the dart," unquote. She says she would make a fine wife, but if crossed in love, watch out. In circumstances reminiscent of the 1816 premiere, in a prior performance at Covent Garden, mezzo-soprano Joyce Di Donato tripped and broke a bone in her foot. The doctor said she could not put any weight on her foot, but she was determined to go on, so she performed from a wheelchair. Here's the final few minutes of her aria, Una voce poco fa.
Io sono voce, sono rispettosa, sono obbediente, voce amorosa, mi lascio reggere, mi fa guidar, mi fa guidar. Ma se mi toccano dove il mio debole sarò una sarò e 100 trappole prima di cene a giocare e 100 trappole prima di cene farò giocare e 100 trappole prima di cene e 100 trappole farò giocare. Io sono docile, sono obbediente, mi lascio leggere e
By the early 1850s, Giuseppe Verdi had established himself as one of the preeminent opera composers of his era. With the recent successes of Rigoletto and Il Trovatore, the public eagerly awaited his next work. While in Paris in 1852, Verdi saw a performance of the younger Alexandre Dumas' play, The Lady of the Camellias. He immediately began composing music for what would become the opera La Traviata. There were some contentious issues in the planning of this opera. For one thing, Verdi insisted that the production be staged with the singers wearing contemporary clothes. In traditional operas, singers wore costumes from historic periods, sometimes centuries in the past. The impresario was adamant that clothing be from the 1600s, and Verdi lost that battle. Another concern Verdi had was with the lead soprano, Fanny Salvini Donatelli. Although she was an accomplished singer, she was 38 years old and overweight, attributes that did not lend themselves to playing the role of a young woman suffering from consumption. He tried unsuccessfully to get a younger singer for that role. Verdi's premonitions of disaster were validated on opening night, March 6, 1853. The first act was well received with applause and cheers, but in the second act, the audience was very vocal in its displeasure with both the baritone and tenor. In the final act, when the doctor announced that the stout-looking soprano only had hours to live, the audience burst out laughing. The following day, Verdi wrote, quote, "La Traviata last night a failure. Was the fault mine or the singer's? Time will tell," unquote. Verdi made some revisions to the opera, and he also made sure he had control over the cast when it reemerged to great acclaim 14 months later. It's interesting to note that not only were there concerns about the quality of the singers in that first performance, but critics, especially in England and the United States, thought the story was immoral. Here's a quote from a critic at the London Times, August 4th, 1856. "We should have thought the production of La Traviata an outrage on the ladies of the aristocracy who support the theatre, if they had not, by crowding their boxes every night, shown that they did not notice the underlying vice of the opera." My excerpts are from a 1968 classic film production starring American soprano Anna Moffo and Italians Franco Bonisoli and Gino Becchi. In the first act, Violetta has fallen in love with Alfredo, but asserts her strong desire to always be free in the aria Sempre Libera.
Sempre libera che gira, voleggiare di gioia in gioia, o che scorre il viver mio, e sentieri del piacer, nasca il giorno al giorno muoia, sempre lieta nei liberi.
emotional core of this opera is the conflict between Violetta and Alfredo's father, Giorgio Germont. The father-daughter relationship figured prominently in several Verdi operas, reflecting the tragedy that had befallen him when his only daughter died as a toddler. In this second act scene, the elder Germont asks Violetta to leave Alfredo because their scandalous affair has threatened the engagement of his daughter. His impassioned appeal finally convinces Violetta that she will relent for the sake of his daughter.
Sento
Georges Bizet was born in Paris in 1838 and entered the Paris Conservatory at the age of 9. He was a creative genius who won awards for compositions at an early age. In spite of his obvious skills, he struggled to make a living as a composer and spent much of his time copying music and giving music lessons. Unfortunately, much of the recognition of his masterful compositions came after his premature death. In 1872, Bizet received a commission from the Opéra Comique for a new opera. When the idea of basing an opera on Prosper Mérimée Carmen was floated, the opera company was hoping for a light-hearted treatment of the subject matter. Bizet worked with two of the most prominent librettists in Paris at the time, Henri Maillac and Ludovic Halévy, and the orchestration was completed in the summer of 1874. As the more tragic and morally charged aspects of the work emerged, management objected to the project. Some of the musicians in the orchestra found the score almost unplayable, and chorus members balked at the extra rehearsals necessary to learn how to act instead of merely stand and sing. But the leading soprano, who had accepted the role of Carmen, Célestine Galli-Marie, threatened to walk out of the production if its tragic ending was not kept in place. Bizet was optimistic about the work and wrote, quote, "They make out that I am obscure, complicated, tedious, more fettered by technical skill than lit by inspiration. Well, this time I have written a work that is full of clarity and vivacity, full of color and melody," unquote. Dress rehearsals seemed to go well, and expectations were high when the work premiered on March 3, 1875. Opening night was a widely anticipated event, with two of the leading French opera composers in attendance, Jules Massenet and Camille Saint-Saëns. The librettist, Ludovic Halévy, wrote this summary account of the evening, quote, "The arrival of Carmen was well received and applauded, as was the duet between Micaela and Don José. Act 2, less enthusiasm. It opened brilliantly. The entrance of Escamillo, the toreador, was most effective. But then the audience cooled and became surprised, unhappy, ill at ease. Backstage, fewer admirers, congratulations restrained. No enthusiasm at all for Act 3 except for Micaela's aria. The audience was frigid during Act 4, unquote." As the orchestra brought the opera to a dramatic conclusion, the audience sat in stunned silence. The reviews in the newspaper the following day were blunt and scathing. Objections focused on two themes. Primarily, they found the opera shockingly immoral, and the orchestral writing drowned out the singers. Critic Paul de Saint-Victor wrote, "The role of Carmen is not a success for Mademoiselle Galli-Marie. She is trivial and brutal. She turns this feline girl into a cynical harlot," unquote. Jean-Henri Dupin wrote to his friend, the librettist Maillac, quote, "I won't mince words. Your Carmen is a flop, a disaster. It will never play more than 20 times. The music goes on and on. It never stops. There's not even time to applaud. That's not music," unquote. These early reactions discouraged attendance at performances over the next few weeks, and management had to offer free tickets just to fill the house. On June 3, 1875, exactly 3 months after its premiere, Bizet died of an apparent heart attack at the age of 36. As is often the case, interest in Carmen surged following his death, and within a few years it was being produced in major opera houses of Europe. The excerpts are from a 2010 Met Opera Live in HD broadcast starring Latvian soprano Elena Garancha, French tenor Roberto Alagna, and bass baritone Teddy Tahu Rhodes from New Zealand. In this first act scene, Don José is holding Carmen prisoner. As she flirts with him, he cannot resist her charms.
Tais-toi, je t'avais dit de ne pas me parler. Je ne te parle pas, je chante pour moi-même, je chante pour moi-même. Et je passe, il n'est pas défendu de penser. Je pense à certains officiers, je pense à certains officiers qui m'aiment, et comme toi, je pourrais bien aimer. Carmen, mon officier n'est pas un capitaine, Amen, il n'est que brigade, mais c'est assez pour une bohémienne. Et je t'aime m'accontenter. Carmen, je suis comme un homme ivre. Si je cède, si je me livre, ta promesse, tu la tiendras. Ainsi je t'aime, Carmen, Carmen, tu m'aimeras. Oui, j'ai dit la Spastia, nous danserons, tu le promets, la Séguedie, Carmen, vivons du Matani, tu le promets. Du Seigneur, chez mon ami la Spastia, nous danserons la Séguedie, pour du Matania. Votre toast, je peux vous le rendre, Seigneur, Seigneur, car avec les soldats, qui m'étonnent, me s'entendent, pour plaisir, ils font des combats. Le cirque est plein ces jours de fête, le cirque est plein du haut-en-bas. Les spectateurs, les spectateurs s'interpellent à grand Votre Bizet capable, poussez jusqu'à la fureur, car c'est la fête du courage, c'est la fête des jeunes cœurs. Regarde, Toreador, regarde, Toreador, Toreador, il songe bien, il songe en combattant, que les noirs te regardent, et que l'amour t'attend, Toreador, l'amour t'attend. Toreador, Je l'aurais perdu pour que toi, que tu t'en ailles, femme, entre ses bras, rire de moi. Non, pas tu diras pas, Carmen, c'est moi que tu suivras.
Non, chérie!
Je suis là de te menacer.
Trouvez-moi bas! Oh, laissez-moi passer!
Pour la dernière fois, démarre! Veux-tu me fuir?
Non! Non! Cette balle, oh, il faut, tu me l'avais donnée. Tiens!
Eh bien, donnez!
In the summer of 1900, Giacomo Puccini sat in a London theatre mesmerized by a play entitled Madama Butterfly, A Tragedy of Japan, by the American playwright David Belasco. By that point in his career, Puccini had scored major successes with Manon Lescaut, La Bohème, and Tosca. Over the next 3 years, his turbulent private life would test the patience of his librettists, Giuseppe Giacosa and Luigi Illica. Scenes were written only to be later discarded. Giacosa and Illica wrote and revised the libretto multiple times before settling on the version that was used for its premiere. Puccini and his librettists were on hand at La Scala Milan for the month leading up to the first performance. A first-rate cast had been secured, led by veteran soprano Rosina Storchio in the title role, and rehearsals went smoothly. Puccini invited 12 friends and relatives as his guests to the sold-out opening night performance, scheduled for February 17, 1904. No one could have predicted the disaster that was about to unfold. Murmurs in the audience grew more vocal as they recognized snippets of melodies from Manon Lescaut and La Bohème. People laughed at the composer as he took a curtain call at the end of the first act. Things went from bad to worse in the second act as whistling and shouting led to long stretches where the singers could not hear the orchestra. A sudden breeze filled Storchio's kimono and a man shouted, "Butterfly is pregnant!" As Butterfly and Suzuki began their vigil, the audience applauded, thinking that the act had ended. More persistent shouts and whistles broke out during the humming chorus. Storchio was seen crying several times during the performance because she could not hear the orchestra. This performance would go down as one of the biggest fiascos in opera history. Puccini and his publisher, Giulio Ricordi, believed the demonstrations were organized by jealous rivals. Reviews were mixed. While some praised Puccini's skill as a composer and orchestrator, others focused on the lack of originality in the score. The scenes, especially in the second act, were simply too long. On the morning after the premiere, with Ricordi's approval, the team of Puccini, Giacosa, and Illica sent a note to the directors of La Scala that they were withdrawing the score and canceling all remaining performances. In spite of this, Puccini swore that he cared more about Butterfly than any of his previous works. Over the next 3 years, he and his team made 4 major revisions to the opera, finally arriving at the 5th edition in 1907. That's the version with which we are now familiar. I have chosen the 2009 Met Opera live in HD performance with American soprano Patricia Racette and Italian tenor Marcello Giordani. The Anthony Minghella production is visually stunning. The show features a Japanese theater-style puppet as the child, a move that was somewhat controversial, but the music is glorious. Let's hear an excerpt of the first act love duet.
Bimba dagli occhi pieni di malia, ora sei tutta mia, sei tutta vestita di giglio, mi piace la treccia tua bruna, fra candidi veli. Affascina cuori li prende e gli amati non mi hanno matato e se mi nego e gli alti reali ma intanto finora non mai detto, ancora non mai detto che m'ami, le sa quella dea le parole che appaga gli ardenti desideri. Celestiali come ora fa nei tuoi lunghi occhi ovali.
Adesso voi siete per me l'occhio del firmamento e mi accesa da fermento che vi ho veduto. sarà